What would you do if you found yourself trapped in a place where the walls seemed to whisper and the silence of the woods pressed down on you like a weight? Cabins in the woods are supposed to be peaceful escapes, quiet retreats away from the chaos of everyday life. But sometimes those same cabins hold secrets darker than the night itself. Tonight, we'll uncover 3 true terrifying stories from haunted cabins in the woods. Stories that will make you think twice before ever booking a stay in one again. So, dim the lights, put on your headphones, and get ready. This is Whispers in the Dark. Story 1. The Cabin with No Way Out. It started as a spontaneous weekend trip. Ethan, a college student in his final year, was stressed from exams and constant deadlines. A friend told him about a cheap cabin listed online, tucked away deep in the Appalachian woods, far from cell service, and perfect for a quiet escape. The pictures looked inviting: a rustic wooden cabin with a porch swing, warm lights glowing from the windows, and a view of endless trees. It looked like something straight out of a postcard. He booked it immediately. The drive there was long, winding, and unsettling. The deeper Ethan went, the fewer signs of civilization there were. His GPS lost signal 20 minutes before he reached the property, and he had to rely on a hand-drawn map the owner emailed him. When he finally pulled up, dusk was falling. The cabin looked just like the pictures, but somehow colder. The wooden planks were weathered, and the windows reflected nothing but the fading daylight. Still, he convinced himself it was just his nerves. Inside, the cabin was simple but cozy. 1 bedroom, a fireplace, and a kitchen stocked with the basics. He unpacked, made himself dinner, and tried to enjoy the peace he'd been craving. But as night fell, the silence became heavy, too heavy. The first whispers. It was past midnight when Ethan woke up to a sound, faint, almost imperceptible. At first, he thought it was the wind moving through the trees, but the sound was different. It was a whisper. He held his breath, straining to hear. The voice was soft, almost like it was coming from inside the walls. "Let me out." Ethan froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He told himself he was imagining it, a trick of exhaustion. Pulling the blanket tighter around him, he forced himself back to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. This time, louder. The words were clearer, and this time, there was more than one voice. "He's here. Don't let him leave." The locked door terrified, Ethan decided to cut his trip short. The morning after the second night, he packed his things and headed for the door. But when he turned the knob, it didn't move. Confused, he tried again, then harder. The door was locked. Not just locked, sealed, like it had fused with the frame. He tried the windows. Every single one was stuck shut, the glass cold to the touch, colder than ice. Panic set in. He grabbed his phone, but of course, there was no signal. The cabin seemed to press in on him, suffocating, as though it knew he wanted to leave. That night, the whispers didn't wait until midnight. They started as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. Louder, closer. "Stay with us. You can't leave. Join us." The final night. On the third night, the whispers turned into screams. Ethan covered his ears, rocking back and forth on the floor, trying to shut them out. The walls shook violently, and shadows moved across them, twisting and writhing like they were alive. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw them, figures, dozens of them, pale, hollow-eyed shapes, pressing against the inside of the walls, as if the wood were a thin veil. Their mouths opened and closed in unison, whispering the same words over and over again. "Stay with us," Ethan screamed, grabbing a chair and smashing it against the window with all his strength. The glass didn't break. Instead, the wood splintered, the force bouncing back as though the cabin itself was rejecting him. And then silence, utter silence. When Ethan opened his eyes again, the sun was streaming through the cracks. Everything looked normal. The door was open, the windows unlocked. He ran. He didn't even pack his things. He bolted to his car and didn't look back until he was miles away. The aftermath later, when he tried to contact the owner of the cabin, the listing was gone. No trace of it remained. He searched for the address, but it didn't exist on any map. To this day, Ethan swears that cabin trapped him, that it was alive, and when he dreams, he still hears those same whispers calling to him, begging him to return. End of story 1. Approximately 2,000 words. Target in full expansion. Suspenseful, layered with descriptions, dialogues, inner thoughts. Story 2. The Lodge That Never Slept. It was supposed to be the perfect family getaway. Claire, her husband Mark, and their 2 kids booked a cabin lodge deep in the Oregon woods for a week of peace and relaxation. They had been through a stressful year, and the idea of a quiet cabin surrounded by towering pines sounded like a dream. The cabin itself looked beautiful from the outside. A large wooden structure with wide windows and a porch that overlooked the forest. It even came with a stone fireplace, vintage furniture, and enough space for the kids to run around. But the moment they stepped inside, Claire felt something was wrong. The first night at first, it was just little things. The lights flickered when they unpacked. A cold draft lingered in the living room no matter how many times Mark checked the windows. The kids complained that the upstairs bedrooms smelled like old water. Not just creaks of the old wood, actual footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway. She assumed it was the kids, until she checked and found them both asleep. "Old houses make noise," he said. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was inside with them. The whispers in the lodge. On the second night, the whispers began. Claire was putting the kids to bed when she heard voices, faint, overlapping murmurs, drifting through the vents. The whispers continued long after midnight, only to start again from another corner of the lodge. The kids began complaining of nightmares, and her son cried about faces in the window, even though they were on the second floor. The third night, the shadows. By the third night, Claire was terrified. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she swore she heard breathing right beside her. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace, the room suddenly grew freezing cold. Claire turned and saw it too. It swayed, twitching unnaturally, before melting into the wall. The whispers came back, louder this time, filling every corner of the lodge. The escape attempt. The family decided they couldn't stay another night. Early the next morning, they packed their things in silence and rushed to the car. But when Mark turned the key, nothing happened. The engine was dead. The car battery, brand new just a week ago, had completely drained overnight. Panic set in. The nearest town was miles away, and there was no phone reception. They were trapped. The final night, with no choice, they stayed one last night. Claire sat awake in the living room, clutching a flashlight, while Mark tried to comfort the kids upstairs. But this time, Claire could finally make out the words, "Never leave. Stay with us forever." From upstairs came the sound of screaming. Her children crowded into the room's corners, their mouths open in silent screams, and then they were gone. The aftermath. Mark refused to discuss it altogether, but the kids, even years later, they still wake up crying from nightmares about the man in the lodge. And to this day, Claire insists that cabin was more than haunted. She believes it was a trap, a place that wanted to keep them forever. Story 3. The night visitor at the cabin. It was supposed to be an ordinary hunting trip. Jake and his friend Ryan had rented a small wooden cabin tucked away deep in the Colorado forest. The listing said it was rustic, simple, and perfect for hunters who wanted to be close to the trails. The cabin was one room, barely big enough for 2 bunk beds, a small table, and a wood stove, but it was cheap, and for a weekend trip, it was perfect, or so they thought. The first signs their first day went smoothly. They hiked, explored the forest, and spent hours trying to track deer. By dusk, they returned to the cabin, exhausted. That night, however, something felt off. Jake was the first to notice it. A strange pattern of scratches along the outside of the cabin walls. At first, he thought it was from animals, but the claw marks were too high, almost at shoulder level for a man. They laughed it off, telling themselves it was just a bear. Still, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were watching them. The knock at midnight. Sometime after midnight, a knock echoed through the cabin. Jake sat up in bed instantly. Ryan groaned, thinking it was just a dream. But then it came again, louder, slower, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. Jake grabbed his flashlight and whispered, "Who the hell would be out here at this hour?" Ryan, trying to sound brave, said maybe it was another hunter lost in the woods. But when they opened the door, no one was there, just the freezing night air and the dark outline of trees. When they shut the door, they noticed something chilling, the fresh claw marks on the wood. Deeper this time, the thing in the woods. The next evening, after another long day of hiking, they tried to shake off the previous night, but as darkness fell, they heard it again. This time, it wasn't knocking. It was footsteps circling the cabin, slow, heavy, crunching in the snow. Jake held his breath, clutching the hunting rifle they'd brought. Ryan whispered, "Say something. Maybe it's human." So Jake called out, "Hello, do you need help?" The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed against the cabin walls. And then, from the tree line, they both swore they saw something. A figure, tall and thin, pale as bone, standing just at the edge of the flashlight's reach. It didn't move, it didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching. They shut the curtains, both trembling, and stayed awake until dawn. The visitor returns. On the third night, things escalated. Around 2 a.m., they woke to the sound of scratching on the cabin walls. Not random scratches this time, deliberate, like someone dragging sharp nails slowly across the wood. Jake whispered, "It's trying to get in." Ryan, desperate, shouted at the walls, cursing and threatening to shoot. The scratching stopped. For a moment, they thought it worked. But then came the sound of breathing, heavy, ragged, right outside the door. When Jake dared to peek through a crack in the curtain, his stomach dropped. There it was, again. The pale figure, closer now, its face partially visible. Its skin was stretched too tightly, eyes black and hollow, and its mouth hung open in a soundless scream. Jake stumbled back, heart racing. When he looked again, it was gone. They were stuck for one more night. They tried to barricade the door with furniture, rifles ready in their hands. At exactly midnight, the knocking returned, louder than ever, furious. Bang, bang, bang. The walls shook, Dust fell from the ceiling, and the whispers began. Dozens of overlapping voices filled the cabin. "Let us in. Join us. You can't leave." Ryan screamed and fired a shot into the door. The sound echoed, the cabin rattled, and then silence. When morning came, the door hung loose on its hinges. The claw marks were everywhere, carved deep into the wood. The aftermath, they fled at sunrise, abandoning most of their gear. He said, "You boys are lucky you made it out. Others, they don't." He refused to say more. Jake and Ryan never returned to the woods. But sometimes, when Jake is home alone at night, he swears he still hears it. Knock, knock, knock. Outro cult to action. Stories of whispers in the night, shadows that never rest, and things that knock at your door long after midnight. Would you dare stay in a cabin like these, knowing what might be waiting for you in the dark? If you've ever experienced something chilling in the woods, a strange sound, a shadowy figure, and if you enjoyed tonight's tales, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Whispers in the Dark, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next nightmarish story. Until next time, keep your lights low, your doors locked, and remember, in the silence of the woods, the whispers are never truly gone.